Okay. Uh, Welcome back to the California Coastal Commission meeting. After that exciting presentation, we have another exciting presentation before us, and I want to thank the members of CAL FIRE and the others who are here to present today. And let's see, hold on one second. I have to get my, I've got so many screens open. For me, that's a challenge. Okay, so we're going to hear from Daniel Nathan, who is the CCC Fire Resiliency Coordinator, who will be followed by Len Nielsen, who is the CAL FIRE Prescribed Fire Staff Chief, followed by our ecologist, Dr. Garcia, then followed by Tim Highland, who is the Natural Resources Program Manager for the Santa Cruz District, and then by our own Madeline Cavallari, who has been heading up for the commission, the VTP and the other CAL FIRE issues with her staff. And so, Madeline, I'm just going to turn it over to you, or I can just introduce our guests. I do want to make just one statement to everybody, including commissioners and to the folks in the audience here and remotely. We are going to break at 12:30 for lunch, so we will have plenty of time for this item, and then we'll see how much further. I think we have one quick item we need to do with Ms. Cavallari, so we'll get to that. Okay, with that, Mr. Nathan, if you can come. Are you here or?
I'm here remotely.
Oh, hi. Hey, nice to see you.
Thank
So
you.
take it away.
Thank you, Chair Brownsie. Item 6B is the informational presentation on the safe and beneficial use of prescribed fire. Staff will provide a short introduction on the state's approach to address catastrophic wildfires, as well as highlight past commission actions on prescribed fire and our agency's coordination with public agency partners. We'll then introduce our two speakers. Next slide, please. California is facing an unprecedented and growing wildfire crisis, where wildfires are increasing in size and intensity on an annual basis. To address this threat, the state is calling for a substantial increase in the pace and scale of prescribed fire, fuel reduction, and thinning of overly dense forests for the purpose of improving fire safety, restoring the health and resilience of the state's natural places, and sustaining the economic vitality of forested areas. A goal of treating 1 million acres annually across state and federal lands is now targeted by 2025, with 400,000 acres to be managed through the use of beneficial fires. Next slide, please. To strategically accelerate these vegetation management efforts, the state has established a wildfire and forest resilience task force to introduce a more holistic, integrated approach towards effective forest management across the state. This task force also includes a prescribed fire working group that will help to develop and align state and federal priorities related to the beneficial use of fire. Measures to increase the use of prescribed fire include, but are not limited to, expanding the state's prescribed fire burn boss certification program, establishing a prescribed fire training center to grow, train, and diversify the state's prescribed fire workforce, expanding cultural burning practices, and developing a state-financed program to reduce liability for private landowners seeking to conduct prescribed burns. Next slide, please. A critical component of the state's multifaceted strategy to address catastrophic wildfires is the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection's Vegetation Treatment Program, commonly known as the CAL-VTP. This program was approved in 2019 and allows CAL FIRE and other CEQA responsible agencies to implement vegetation treatment projects on more than 20 million acres of land using the CAL-VTP EIR for CEQA compliance. Eligible treatment activities include manual and mechanical treatment, herbicide use, targeted livestock grazing, and prescribed fire. Next slide, please. As defined in the state's strategic plan for expanding the use of beneficial fire, prescribed fire is the intentional application of fire to land for wildland management goals, such as the prevention of catastrophic wildfires, habitat improvement, and carbon resilience. Under Public Resources Code 4491, prescribed fire undertaken for any wildland management goal is considered to be a public purpose burn. Thus, together with managed fire, which is the strategic choice to manage unplanned ignitions for wildland management purposes, and cultural burning, which is the intentional application of fire to land by California Native American tribes, tribal organizations, and cultural fire practitioners, prescribed fire is a type of beneficial fire activity that may be selected to meet certain resource management or stewardship objectives. Next slide, please. In the past, the Commission has authorized prescribed fire as part of larger restoration and fire prevention projects, often through federal consistency actions. For example, the Commission authorized a coastal prairie restoration project in the King Range National Conservation Area in Humboldt County through mechanical treatment activities, pile burning, and controlled broadcast burning. Similarly, in the Big Sur region of the Los Padres National Forest, a strategic community fuel break was reestablished along approximately 13 miles of ridgeline using manual thinning, mastication, and pile burning. Outside of these federal consistency actions, the Commission has authorized university-led research projects involving the use of prescribed fire to restore degraded habitat, such as coastal sage scrub species on portions of Lagoon Island in Santa Barbara County. Next slide, please. Given these previous actions and with the state mandate to increase the pace and scale of vegetation treatment, Commission staff have been coordinating with many public agencies with expertise in fire resilience to both learn and facilitate efficient coastal permitting pathways for fire-related projects coming forward. For example, since 2019, Commission staff have collaborated with numerous resource conservation districts, state parks, and CAL FIRE to develop coastal-specific treatment standards as part of the Forest Health and Fire Resilience Public Works plans that have been developed and certified to streamline Coastal Act authorization. Along the way, Commission staff have attended numerous site visits led by our public agency partners to discuss lessons learned from prior projects, including those using prescribed fire, and how to achieve the dual goals of public safety and ecological restoration. In the spirit of ongoing coordination, Commission staff have also reached out to California Native American tribes and tribal organizations to discuss development applications where prescribed fire may be used, including exploring opportunities where cultural burning practices may be implemented. Next slide, please. I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, Len Nielsen, who will be discussing some of the safety considerations when planning for and implementing prescribed burns. Len is a prescribed fire staff chief for CAL FIRE based out of Sacramento, with over 25 years of experience as both a forester and firefighter. Len is currently co-chair of the state's prescribed fire working group and has been conducting prescribed burns since 2002 and currently serves as the signatory for the California State Prescribed Fire Burn BROS program. Len has also collaborated with many of our staff on fire-related projects in the past, including with the statewide planning unit back in early 2020 to discuss a fuel break and restoration project in San Luis Obispo County. Len's expertise has been invaluable to our understanding of wildfire resilience planning, and we greatly appreciate his willingness to present today. Following Len's presentation, senior ecologist Dr. Lauren Garsky Garcia will introduce our second speaker, Tim Highland from State Parks, who will discuss some of the ecological considerations of prescribed fire planning and implementation. With that, I'd now like to turn the presentation over to Len.
Thank you, Daniel. So can we have the first slide of my presentation come up? Great, and we can go, since Daniel gave me an introduction, I'll pass my introduction. That was very good, Daniel. Thank you very much for having me here today. I appreciate the time you've given me. Let's go to the next slide. Great, this is it. So why the Cal VTP? He mentioned it in his introduction and in his comments. It's a great tool in order to comply with CEQA, in short, right? It's a programmatic EIR. It says, that we will, by enacting this plan, this project, we will follow these guidelines or these specific project requirements, which are identified for each type of resource that may be impacted through CEQA. And the Cal VTP covers each one of those in depth. And it has mitigation measures that are already planned for that resource, such as, let's say you have a rare, threatened, endangered species. Well, it has identified those species by the ecoregion, and it identifies what specific project requirements you would use in order to avoid impacts for that species, or aesthetics, or cultural resources, or agriculture, or all of these things that are identified as possible impacts for the public, right? For impact for resources. So the Cal VTP is a tool in the toolbox in order to comply with CEQA, in order to prevent avoidable impacts for a project. And one of the treatments for projects for fuel reduction, of course, is prescribed fire. So next slide. So the treatment activities within the Cal VTP, just real short, we have 6 different activities that were mentioned. 2 of them involve prescribed burning. We have broadcast burning and power burning, mechanical and manual treatment that Daniel mentioned, herbivore and herbicide treatments. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the prescribed fire aspects of that, the pile burning and the broadcast burning. So next slide. So what does prescribed fire look like in California? As mentioned earlier in earlier presentations, we are past the what should we do. We're in this implementation phase of what can we do, and we need to get that going and get that started so that we can get to the end. So then we can see the end. We know how to get there. Now we know the tools to use to get there. Now we need to put those tools on the ground, in place, and working, right? And that's why we're having this massive amount in state resources for staffing improvement, funding mechanisms, grant mechanisms that are all in place in order to increase that pace and scale. And that's happening in real time. And so with that, one of those treatments that mentioned, not just with Cal VTP, but for other projects for fuel reduction, is prescribed fire. And so that's one of the tools in the toolbox. It's not always the perfect tool in the toolbox, but it is a very useful tool in the toolbox in order to do large-scale projects, even small-scale projects. And so in the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan that the governor put out a couple of years ago, it stipulated in Goal 1, prescribed fire. And within the Goal 1 of prescribed fire, we created, and I'm on the task force as mentioned, I'm actually co-lead for prescribed fire for the governor's task force with my partner Lance Noxum from the Forest Service, and together with other contributors across a wide range of interests, we wrote the California Strategic Plan for the beneficial use, or for the expanding use of beneficial fire, a term I want to talk about a little bit more. Next slide. So what is beneficial fire? And how does it occur, right? California. Well, property owners will want to use it for land management because it's a great tool for just that. In order to reduce fuels, to have a better ecosystem, to have a healthier forest. California has seen a fire return interval across California in various places, but we say 5 to 7 years in grass and brush, sometimes 3. And then in a lot of places where it's more forested, you're looking at 7 to 12 years. Fire return interval. Fire comes back, California. All of California, except for some small places, are considered fire adapted or fire dependent, which I'm sure Tim is going to talk about more. But when we use prescribed fire, we work with the practitioners of prescribed fire, such as the Prescribed Fire Burn Bust program and prescribed burn associations, parks, all these agencies, CAL FIRE, of course, the Forest Service. We work across boundaries and we work together in order to apply this prescribed fire. Prescribed fire is very different than wildfire. And so part of a prescribed fire is a plan. And I'm going to go into the details of the plan. Next slide, please. So the plan, what makes up the plan? Well, a plan for prescribed fire is actually very detailed. It starts with the project identification. What, when, where, why, how, and what for, right? When. When is the plan to do this project? What's it for? What's its goal? What are the objectives? Where is it going to occur in the landscape? What are the benefits of this? What does the landowner want out of it? What does the agency want out of it? A lot of landowners in brush-covered lands, they see that that's a fire hazard. So they want the fire hazard reduced. Some landowners want the fire hazard reduced as well as forage improved for the deer or elk or other species that are out there, the grazers. So we take into consideration what the landowner's objectives are as well as the state. as part of the analysis in project description. We talk about burn area. What's it going to burn? What kind of fuels? What does that look like? What is it going to burn like under certain parameters or conditions, or what we often call prescription window? The environmental settings. What species are there that may be impacted? When can we avoid those impacts? Those are questions we ask up front. We use the CalVTP again. Those mitigation measures are already plumbed in there to say, okay, if we have red-legged frog, we're going to do this. If we have spotted owl, we're going to do this. This is how we're going to avoid impacts. We already have that approved through public comment and contribution. The burn prescription, I have that bolded because that's really where there's a lot of nuts and bolts with prescribed fire. I'm going to go into that a little bit more. Weather and fuel moisture, right? Those things are constantly changing in prescribed fire and fuel conditions, and we measure them. There's a whole science behind it, and so we can monitor that and know when that opportunity occurs for us to be most advantageous in order to apply prescribed fire on landscape. Fire behavior predictions. There's a lot of predictive models out there like Behave, which is a fire prediction model that allows us to estimate the fire's intensity, the flame height, the length, what resources we need based on that fire's anticipated output to control that fire. So when they're very good, and they've been developed for 50 years plus. Smoke management plan. We know a lot about smoke. There's all kinds of potable air and air quality standards that we work with air quality right now in California very tightly in order to provide mutual benefit and to understand smoke impacts and to where these smoke sensitive communities are, where the schools are, where senior living is. We have these as upfront impacts or potential impacts when we look at smoke impacts. And so if we know we have a sensitive community to the east, we're going to make sure that the wind's not going in that direction when we do our prescribed fire. We look at the weather. We know, okay, that's not available. That's not going to be an opportunity for us to burn. Public information. Public information is also a public license, or the sense of license, right? Or our social license for smoke, for prescribed fire. It's really increased over the last few years. And so having this social license in order to implement more prescribed fire, there's a better understanding in the public of what prescribed fire is and how different it is from wildfire. And so we on our task force, we have a public information communications subgroup that is improving that even more every day, because every day with the public, we want to increase that communication and that understanding and education. And so we're doing that. And these plans, every one of these burn plans that we do has a communications portion, as well as notification portion. And then project implementation and task schedule. That's really this is when we're going to do it, because our documents tend to expire, right? We have our CalVTPs and our VMP program, Vegetation Management Plan, and our California Vegetation Treatment Plan. They're 10 years. They're good for 10 years. That document's good for 10 years, and then you have to redo it, re-up it. And we also consider any time we get something that happens like a site condition change. Let's say we get a wildfire that comes through an area. Well, now the site conditions have changed and we have to redo it and re-examine the potential environmental impacts for that project. Next slide. So what's in this implementation plan or burn plan? Well, we have what's called an incident action plan that gets built as part of this burn plan or firing plan. So when we do the burn plan, we say what we're going to burn, where we're going to burn, how big is it going to be, what the fuel type is going to be. But then the firing plan really dives down even deeper to understand with the burn boss to say, this is where I'm going to start this prescribed burn in this top corner or this bottom corner or this western corner, eastern corner, in order for this fire's intensity to stay where I want it to be. If you think about burning a piece of paper from left to right with wind going from right to left, you burn down here, it's going to go whoosh, right? It's going to go with the wind. If you burn it this way, it's going to burn slowly against the wind because the wind is constantly blowing the heat away from the fuel source. Prescribed fire is really the same way, right? But it's fuels, it's brush, it's grass, it's timber understory. So we plan where we're going to do the burn in order to control the fire's intensity. And so we map it out. And when we do the firing plan, we map out. We know that we want to start in this corner when the wind is going this direction with the fuel conditions providing us that opportunity within our prescription window. We know that we can keep the fire's intensity when we have air temperatures of less than 80 degrees. We have wind of less than 20 miles an hour. We have relative humidity at greater than 20%, right? We have these parameters that we examine and can monitor live to determine if we're in our opportunity to keep that prescribed fire in control. And we do that live, and we have specialists, fire burn specialists, analysis folks that's what they live and breathe. We call them F-bands. And so they love it, and it's really fun to watch the fire weather, especially on wildfire, but it's even better on prescribed fire because you're understanding and predicting what's happening live in order to keep that fire at a low intensity, because that's usually how we run prescribed fire. Unless we have a big catcher's mitt, and then we can have an increase in burn intensity, but we're always looking at where is that fire gonna go, where are those embers going, and is it safe? Always looking at the last question of the day is it safe? Is it safe for us to continue? So the firing plan really drills down on what resources are there in the incident action plan, and we put names in the positions for their job duties, such as a firing team, a holding team, which is the crew that sweeps up behind to make sure the fire doesn't jump across the boundary of the road, the barrier. And then we have a contingency team. A contingency team is, if that fire does jump across the line, they're the ones that are dedicated to put that fire out at that next level, right? In typical assignments, the firing team stops, the holding team goes into play to hold the fire, and then if the fire starts getting a little bigger, the contingency team comes in and assists, right? And so we have these levels of backup for safety every time we do one of these prescribed fires. So we keep it in control, and that's why 99.5% of all prescribed fires stay within prescription, stay within control, national average. So we have a really good success rate, and we have a huge training program within CAL FIRE and the Forest Service, and now private burn associations, where we're signing off on prescribed fire burn bosses. They receive 40 hours of training at a minimum, plus prerequisite training, which is another 80 hours-ish, depending on how long it takes you to complete it, in order to even take the 40-hour class. And so there's a really deep sense of awareness of fire safety for the prescribed fire burn boss, for practitioners such as Tim and myself that have well over 20 years experience doing this, but we're imparting that to really increase our pace and scale, with safety being one of our #1 goals, and increase our pace and scale. Next slide. So with that, one of the things that we really cover in great detail during the prescribed fire is what we call the go, no-go checklist. So here's a few items on the go, no-go checklist that we cover. What is our prescription window, and are we in it? And we're going to document that the day of the fire. Are we within our air temperature? Are we within our relative humidity target? Are we within the wind? Are our fuel moisture levels in the right spot for us to understand, based on the science, that we are going to be well within our parameter to have a safe fire? And we do that the day of the fire with a test burn, a very small test burn. Usually it's, a quarter acre. So size of this room. We'll have an area that's isolated that has a fire line around it, and we'll burn that first thing in the morning when conditions, are, as conditions heat up in California during most days, they heat up and our prescription windows close. And so, we get more increased wind with diurnal winds and things like that. But in the morning when we start, we're checking it out, seeing how the fuels actually burn. So we compare the science to the actual right away with the go, no go on every one of these burns that we do. So with that, we say, yep, it looks good, or we have something that maybe doesn't look good, but we've mitigated it by having additional resources, or we've mitigated it because we know there's some sort of change in the plan that allows us to mitigate it. So this is the last item that we do is the safety checklist is the go, no go checklist. And with that, last slide. Questions? Keeping it in 10 minutes.
Great job. I'm sure there'll be questions, but we'll just hold them to the end of the presentation. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Lynn. That was an excellent overview. And good morning, Chair Brownsie and commissioners. Given that protection and enhancement of natural resources is core to the Coastal Act, we wanted to devote some time and expertise to the ecological considerations of prescribed fire. We recognize that prescribed fire is an indispensable and often efficient tool for addressing the legacy of California's past management practices, present risks, and future resilience. Sensitive resources, including rare species and habitats, will be affected by non-discriminate treatments such as prescribed fire, though these effects have the potential to be ecologically beneficial when implemented conscientiously. Factors that shape ecological outcomes include a site's fire history, the vegetation communities as they present, and any in-ground reserves that may be lying dormant, the successional stages and processes, the volumes of fuel and intensity of burn, and the extent to which any of these are mosaicked across the targeted landscape. Ecosystems are inherently dynamic, and in California, fire has long played a critical role in forming most. Fire acts, ecosystems react. The goal is to reintroduce fire in a way that recognizes how
Doctor,
a given
could you
ecosystem
just
is
move
adapted.
into the mic a little
Sure.
bit? Thanks.
My apologies.
No.
The goal is to reintroduce fire in a way that recognizes how a given ecosystem is adapted and anticipates its response in light of many surrounding stressors. Mindfully returning fire to the land can be a critical step in restoring many of our threatened ecosystems and facilitating their resilience going forward. To speak more about this today, we've invited Tim Hyland, a senior environmental scientist and State Parks Natural Resource Program Manager from the Santa Cruz District, which spans the whole of San Mateo and Santa Cruz counties. Tim is a botanist by training and has been at state parks for 26 years now. Among his many responsibilities, he has worked with prescribed fire throughout his career, first as a firefighter and now as a state parks burn boss. Tim is a valued colleague and partner in the Central Coast region, and the depth of his knowledge is truly impressive. Earlier this year, we and several partners were in the field observing conditions after implementation of a forest health project that had been approved under the San Mateo County PWP. A side conversation that Tim and I had precipitated led to another field trip to view what Parks has been doing outside of the coastal zone in the rare Santa Cruz Sandhills ecosystem. There, we learned about the cautious experimental application of prescribed fire over a chaparral area that had not burned in the county's recorded history of at least 120 years, and which supports several federally listed species while also being situated near developed areas and vulnerable to catastrophic fire. The evident success of state parks efforts and the lessons learned along the way are the types of insight we all need as we work through these current challenges. Like the Commission, State Parks has a mandate to protect and connect, to protect natural resources and connect people to these special places. We share these goals, and by sharing knowledge through our partnerships, as we're aiming to do here today, we are all better prepared to accomplish them. And with that, I will turn the mic over to Tim so that he can talk about using prescribed fire as a tool to specifically benefit ecological resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. That was a generous introduction. Thank you for having me here. Happy to follow up on Len's talk, which I think was a great summary of all of the work that goes into putting fire back on the land and using prescribed fire. And you might, after hearing that talk, want to know, why would we do something that is so difficult to do, that we would have to work so hard at? You know, why is the saying playing with fire, you know, used when you're talking about something that is inherently risky? So what I'm here to talk about is how this landscape is adapted to fire, and why putting fire back on the land is really important and is irreplaceable for maintaining the biodiversity that we've inherited in state parks and throughout the coastal zone. So part of the reason to introduce prescribed fire is that there isn't really an option to not have fire. We tried that. We've tried putting out all the fires that come, and we can see in this last decade pretty clearly that that is not a viable strategy. And the reason for this, next slide, is that we live in what is referred to as a Mediterranean climate. This one, could I get the next slide? Unfortunately, this is not the presentation that I wanted to present. So we will just have to use what I've got. So will you go back one, and we will discuss it. So if you could go back one. What was, and now there we are. All right. So instead of a graph showing a Mediterranean climate, we have a nice, illustration of some fire in a grassland. But we don't need the graphic necessarily. A Mediterranean climate is one that has cool, wet winters, warm, dry summers. You know, we all know this. We've lived in it. I've grown up in it. I assume most of you have too. But what that means for fire is that most of the time, vegetation rots when it is warm and wet. So you'll notice in California, it is rarely warm and wet. It is either wet and cool, or it is warm and dry. And so those cool, wet winters allow vegetation to grow, and then those hot, dry summers allow it to cure, dry out, and be available to ignite. Next slide, please. So and fire is as important to the distribution of plant communities on the landscape as is water, right? You're looking at a desert landscape here. It's, fire is not really a big player in this particular instance, but I want you to think about those landscapes that you see, where you see grasslands on flat areas, and you see shrubs on hillsides, and you see forests down in drainages. Those are all responses not just to water and to aspect and to soil, but also to fire over the last millennium. So for thousands of years, fire, as Len said, every 5 to 7 years in most ecosystems has been going through these ecosystems and has been molding them. So the vegetation molds the fire behavior, and the fire behavior molds the vegetation. It's a feedback loop. Next slide, please. So almost all plant communities, and certainly in the coastal zone, are adapted to fire. You wouldn't think, looking at this slide of a coast redwood forest, it doesn't bring to mind a flammable ecosystem, right? Everybody knows that redwoods are resistant to fire. They have thick bark, and so that's the story that always gets told about redwoods. But the story that doesn't get told about redwoods is that their needles, their leaves, are actually incredibly flammable, and they are great carriers of fire. When fire gets up in that bark, it throws embers. And so they are very fire adapted, not fire dependent, but certainly adapted to fire. And it benefits them. Frequent fire in redwood forests reduces other less fire adapted species, so they don't have to compete with them. Next slide, please. Okay, we have your correct power. I would love that.
Way to roll with it, though.
I can make it work. Oh, look at that. See? Mediterranean climate. Okay. Yeah, on to the next, which will be a similar, on to the next. There's that mosaic that fire creates in all of those different landscapes, right? And so that was, you have those grasslands, you have those shrublands, so there's that. Let's do one more slide and see how we go. Now we're back on track, but there are some other things that would have been wrong if we'd continued. So each of these communities, this community is adapted to fire. Redwoods are adapted to fire, but they're adapted to a particular type of fire. So all fire is not the same, right? All communities are adapted to a particular, what we call fire regime. And that fire regime has a variety of components. How often does the fire come in? We've already talked about fire frequency, or the fire return interval. But also, when does it burn? So Lauren was talking about our work in the chaparral, and chaparral tends to burn, in the late summer when it's hot and it's going to blow up, right? Well, that's a very difficult time to do a prescribed burn. So how do you work with that and get those same results, but maybe not burning in that season? Because that's going to have an effect on how that plant community responds. And then intensity. Again, low intensity fires are much easier to deal with from a prescribed fire perspective. Burning grasslands, easy peasy. Burning forest understory, you can keep the flame lengths very low. You can step over the fire line. And so that gives you a lot of options for control. High intensity fire is significantly more difficult to control, but some communities rely on it. You can't put a low intensity fire into a chaparral community. It just doesn't work. Next. So if you change this fire regime in any way, you're going to change the plant community. This is not on the coast, but these are giant sequoias in the Sierra, the western slope of the Sierra. And this picture was taken in the 1850s, roughly. Next slide. This was before fire suppression, when you had frequent low intensity fire. Here, you can still see the tree on the left, and you can see that hollow in that tree. That was made by the frequent low intensity fire. Now, because fire was suppressed, you have a lot of fire sensitive species that are not adapted to fire, growing up, increasing the fuel loads. And we've lost a very significant amount of our old growth giant sequoias in the Sierra in just the last 5 years. And that is because of this buildup of fuel. Next slide. Our grasslands, our coastal prairies, are actually a fire-dependent community. Without fire, they rapidly transform into shrublands and then into forest. Without some sort of disturbance regime, you wouldn't have coastal prairie and all of the species that rely on it. You can see here, this was a prescribed fire that we did at Wilder Ranch State Park in Santa Cruz County, and you can see the burned side and the unburned side. And so you see those shrubs there are coyote brush, and without burning them, then that quickly turns into a shrub community. That shrub communities are fine, but what we want is that mosaic. Next slide. And coastal grasslands are some of the most diverse plant assemblages that we have in North America. And not only the plants, but also the animals that rely on them. There's an incomplete list here of many of the species that rely on coastal prairie. So without some sort of disturbance regime, and prehistorically it was always fire, these ecosystems go away. In my, from an ecological perspective, my relatively short career, I have watched any number of grasslands convert into shrublands. So that's less than a quarter century. Next slide, please. And so, again, playing with fire, why use fire? Why not use something a little more controllable, containable? It's exactly is that the variability, the complexity that fire on a landscape, its interaction with slope and topography and fuels, that gives you the kind of mosaic that creates the diversity that we have. So at this scale, you get, this is a prescribed fire that we did in Big Basin some years ago. You can see that some of the places were burned at very low intensity, some were burned at very high intensity, and you get that diversity. Next slide, please. And then as we zoom in, if you see, this is some redwoods in Butno State Park that are burning in their hollows. And those hollows were created by, it could be as many as hundreds of fires. It actually takes quite a while to create a hollow in a redwood. And so putting fire back in there keeps those hollows, but it's creating those hollows that get used by bats. And then it's scarring the outside of the redwood and creating scars that are used by hermit thrushes and other species to winter in. So this is the reason for fire, is that you can't do this with a masticator. You can't do this with a chainsaw. You really can't do it with any other tool. And it's doing things that the species that evolved here rely on and are adapted to. Next slide. So yeah, fire is a part of the landscape of California. We don't get to choose whether we have fire or not. We do get to choose in some instances what kind of fire we want, and that's what prescribed fire attempts to do. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Okay, Madeline.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I just wanted to conclude to quickly say thank you again to Len Nielsen and Tim Hyland for joining us today in person and providing us with all of this really fantastic information, and for the ongoing partnership of CAL FIRE and state parks in advancing fire resilience projects in the coastal zone. As we're so acutely aware, especially this week, the impacts of climate change are here now, and we have no time to waste in protecting the coast, coastal habitats, and the people who live and visit the coast. So it's great to hear about the innovative work around prescribed fire being utilized to protect our ecosystems, even helping them thrive in the future, while at the same time minimizing the risks of catastrophic wildfire. And also to hear that this work is going to be scaled up in the near future. I also wanted to thank commission staff, especially our statewide planning and ecology teams that have been really engaged in issues around fire resilience and ecosystem health for really about the last 3 years in a lot of depth, and have prioritized the review of the work. We're committed to working with all of our partners to ensure that fire resilience projects are designed to be consistent with the Coastal Act and are efficiently reviewed and permitted to keep up with the increased pace and scale of the projects that are now being funded across the state. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madeline. Great presentation, and I know everybody's been working super hard on these VTPs and all of the activities surrounding them. I know there's probably going to be some questions, but we're going to go to, unless Mr. Ainsworth, you look poised. No? Okay. Just thoughtful. Just thoughtful. Okay. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment? How many do we have?
Yes, we have 2 members on Zoom.
Okay, please bring them in. Thank you. They'll have 2 minutes.
Okay, first we have Ben Blom and then David Cowman. Ben, you should be in as a panelist if you'd like to unmute yourself and state your name for the record, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Ben Blum. I'm the Director of Stewardship and Restoration for Save the Redwoods League. We're an organization that's been around for over 100 years with a focus on protecting, restoring, and connecting people to our iconic redwood groves across the state of California. And that's inclusive of coast redwood forests as well as giant sequoia forests. I really want to echo a lot of the comments that have already been made by our colleagues at CAL FIRE in state parks. You know, fire is a natural part and an essential process of our California forests and inclusive of our coast redwood forests. When we have low intensity, frequent wildfires, fire serves an incredibly beneficial role for our forest ecosystems. It recycles nutrients, it creates habitat for wildlife, and reduces forest density and competition among individual trees. Decades of fire suppression have really are posing a threat to our existing redwood forests, most urgently within the giant sequoia range, but also within the coast redwood range. Fire suppression, the prevention of wildfires and removal of fire as a natural process has altered the structure and composition of these forests, increasing density of trees, increasing brush and litter on the forest floor, and makes them less resilient in a time of climate change and drought. So by suppressing fire, we're actually increasing the likelihood that these fires are heavily impacted by high intensity fire. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples used fire as a tool on the landscape. And through some of these proposals for prescribed burning, we're trying to reintroduce the use of fire as a tool, as described by Tim and our colleagues at CAL FIRE. We certainly need to scale up these treatments. And I'm hoping that the commission will play a role in supporting and advocating for these treatments as well as they're proposed across the Coast Range. Thank you.
Next, we have David Cowman. David, you should be able to speak if you unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is David Cowman, and I'm a forest ecologist for the San Mateo Resource Conservation District. I'm speaking on behalf of our Executive Director, Kelix Nelson, who is unable to make the meeting today. In 2021, the San Mateo RCD worked with the California Coastal Commission, San Mateo County Planning Department, CAL FIRE, and local land management agencies to develop the San Mateo County Forest Health and Fire Resilience Public Works Plan, or PWP. The PWP was focused explicitly on developing a cost-effective and programmatic approach to compliance with the California Coastal Act to increase the pace and scale of critical project implementation to improve both ecological conditions and the resilience of our landscapes to future climate change-induced wildfire. The San Mateo RCD thus far has successfully completed the first project under the PWP at the Girl Scouts of Northern California's Camp Buteno Creek. We plan to continue to utilize the PWP to manage landscapes in San Mateo County, both to promote ecological diversity and forest health, as well as minimize the risk of catastrophic wildfire. Included in the PWP is the use of prescribed fire as a cost-effective and ecologically sound means of managing wildland systems along the Central Coast. With the documented history of indigenous use of fire and a suite of plant communities adapted to fire and for fire, fire has proven to be a critical component of the healthy management of these landscapes. In the past several decades, prescribed fire has been successfully utilized by various land managers in the region in diverse plant communities, including grasslands, shrublands, and forested ecosystems. Prescribed fire is not new to California, and it's our hope that we can utilize prescribed fire as a tool in our toolbox to continue to manage wildland systems in an ecologically appropriate manner, while simultaneously reducing the risk of catastrophic fire for the benefit of both natural systems as well as human health and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public comment.
Great, thanks, Val. Okay, bringing it back to commissioners. Yes, Commissioner Kunkel.
Thank you, Chair Brownsie. And first, I just want to express my appreciation for all the presenters today and the public commenters as well. This was fascinating, very educational. Thank you for sharing your expertise. The controller and I want to elevate the importance of listening to the expertise from traditional ecological knowledge. We probably could have avoided our extended wildfire season, the drought that we're currently experiencing, even despite climate change, if we had just listened to the native experts who know their ancestral land better than any of us. And they've been telling us that this is the solution for hundreds of years. So, and in my humble understanding, and as the public commenters and we've heard today, these frequent low intensity cultural burns have been around much longer than us, for thousands of years. The elders teach their young not to fear fire. They encourage children to have a healthy relationship with fire. It's sort of the antithesis of what we learn to not play with fire, right? What the Smokey the Bear campaign, all of the fire suppression promotion that we've heard for so long. So it's just important that we include and hire and pay traditional knowledge holders for every step of this process: training, evaluation, research, analysis, planning, implementation, contingency, maintenance, every step of the process. And just jumping to more broadly overall, I know we're talking about prescribed fire here, but in a more general sense, we just need to elevate traditional ecological knowledge more broadly as state policy, more than just requiring engagement and consultation. Often we see tribal knowledge more as a symbolic afterthought in policy or a box to check. So just bringing it back to the topic at hand, and I actually do have a question. how are traditional knowledge holders included in your prescribed fire plans? Maybe this is for the CAL FIRE representative. Are you hiring them? Are you paying them? What does that look like in each step of the process? Training, evaluation, implementation, et cetera.
So a huge gamut, of course, using cultural burners. Over the last year, CAL FIRE has hosted 3 cultural burning awareness sessions with tribes across California, considering additional cultural burning awareness classes for state employees, including state parks, and even some of our federal partners have attended these classes, these cultural burning awareness classes. We held one near Woodland in Cache Creek with the Maidu Nation tribes and a couple other tribes that I'm blanking on the name at the moment. We started off near Mariposa, which is near my hometown, with the Mono and some other tribes nearby like Chukchansi that we've engaged with to get cultural burning awareness and their traditional ecological knowledge awareness shared, because that knowledge is only gained when it's shared. And so finding tribal members that are willing to share that knowledge, like Bill Tripp up there in the Karuk territory and Yurok territories, was an opportunity for CAL FIRE and other state employees to take advantage of that tribal ecological knowledge that they possess. And tribal members like Frank Lake up there also gave us some awareness training, and Margot Robbins up there said, hey, this is why we do these cultural burns. This is why it's integral within our culture. And so the state is expanding opportunities for cultural burners, such as SB 332, allowing cultural burners to be equivalent to the prescribed fire burn boss. Within the prescribed fire burn boss program, by being identified as a cultural burner, they will have access to the prescribed fire liability claims fund, which is a $20 million claims fund in order to have that liability insurance, so to speak. It's not really insurance, but it's in order for them to have that accessible to them, by having the tribe say, yes, you are one of our cultural burners. You are our tribal ecological knowledge expert. And so by the tribes having the ability to say, this is our person, not the state, the tribe gets to do that. We're making that shift, recognizing the importance of tribal ecological knowledge within prescribed fire. And when we say prescribed fire, you heard the term today, beneficial fire. Beneficial fire really has 3 parts to it. It has traditional prescribed fire. We're going to burn this area in order to reduce fuels. That's traditional prescribed fire. That's our objective, right? Secondly is managed fire, which Forest Service, when an accidental ignition occurs, they recognize that opportunity exists for that managed fire to continue and to have an ecological benefit for the public, right? So that's managed fire in a nutshell. And then lastly, which we discussed and really defined in the strategic plan, was cultural burning. That's the other element of beneficial fire. So you have managed fire, cultural burning, and prescribed fire all in one, really encompassed in the term beneficial fire, because we recognize that it really takes all 3, not just one, and they all add to one another. And within each one of those kinds of fires, there's usually an element of each. So it's really diverse, and it's really encompassing, and it's really engaging with tribes with the state instead of consultation.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Just one more follow-up question, or kind of just to repeat the question. So for these sessions that you held throughout the knowledge sessions, that's fantastic. Were the tribes paid for their participation?
So it is challenging sometimes to pay like a direct wage. In fact, it's not allowed by the state to just pay a direct wage. So we were able to do a service contract with tribes, or with organizations, third party, that were there, and then they were able to pay honorariums and such, and for the venue and things like that. So we had a limited budget in order to do that, and I still have a limited budget within my program to continue to do that. And so we're looking at doing more of those. The next one right now we have tentatively scheduled with Don Hankins in order to do one in the Chico area.
Fantastic. And then on your team, have you hired any Native American tribal members?
So within CAL FIRE, we do have some tribal members within CAL FIRE that work as environmental scientists, foresters,
Sure.
within the department, but we do not have, to my knowledge, this would be like a senior Serena Ortega question from CAL FIRE, because she would have the statistics on it. But to my knowledge, within Prescribed Fire, I only have 5 staff within CAL FIRE. And so as a program, none of us are tribal members.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Conkle, and thanks for raising those important issues with respect to tribal issues. Appreciate that. Okay, Vice Chair Hart and then Commissioner Escalante.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentations. It was really interesting. I want to just start by saying that I know from all of our perspectives, because this is something that we've talked a lot about and we've dealt with, the Coastal Commission and our staff is absolutely dedicated to working with CAL FIRE to facilitate and streamline the CAL VTP process and the special coastal CAL VTP process that we have. And I know from myself, I'm from Sonoma County, which, you could argue there's a lot of ground zeros when it comes to fire in California, but it's hard to argue with over 4,000 homes lost, fires that go over a 6-lane highway and take out Kmart's and giant suburbs. So we've been through it, and it's been a great learning process since the 2017 Tubbs fire, and a lot of Sonoma County, of course, is in the coastal zone. And we look forward to working with CAL FIRE in Sonoma County and on the Coastal Commission to develop VTP projects on the coast. So thank you so much for that. And on that topic of CAL VTP, one of the challenges I think is for private landowners to get assistance in how to use it. I mean, they have enough problems. CEQA is a huge obstacle. So let's just skip over CEQA and say, okay, the process is going to be CAL VTP. This is what we want to use for the 10 years, for one thing. And just because hopefully as we use it, it'll become easier and easier. So I'm just curious, what can be done to further assist private landowners with CAL VTP in the coastal zone and throughout state?
Great question. Thank you, Carol. So one of the things that we are doing, not what we can do, but what we are doing is we have extended granting opportunities, and Cal Poly San Luis Obispo has a current grant of just over $4 million pertaining to education and awareness of the Cal VTP as part of environmental training and for CEQA training for people to do fuel reduction projects for the public. And so there's something happening right here locally that's occurring. We have extended the workforce granting opportunities as well for people to develop workforce in order to have those people that can actually conduct those fuel reduction projects statewide. So not just here in the coastal zone, but across the state. But that workforce, developing that workforce will benefit everybody. And so there's just 2 things that the state's doing in order to advance that tool of choice, to get more fuel reduction, not just the Cal VTP, but, as you mentioned, any CEQA document, to get more CEQA awareness, because CEQA is not a permit, right? It's a process, and going through it is a process. And so getting that awareness of that process within the state within CAL FIRE, we've recently revamped our curriculum for CEQA awareness within our own department. Last year under wildfire resiliency, we added 30 additional environmental scientists to our ranks. Part of that increase in staff is also an increase in training and awareness of the processes that the state uses in order to conduct these fuel reduction projects. And for the majority of fuel reduction projects within CAL FIRE, we always use some sort of CEQA document, some sort of mechanism, whether it's a notice of exemption, the CAL VTP, or a VMP program. And so there's a huge training element within state service in order to understand that process. And so over the last 2 years, we've implemented, and I'm part of the cadre doing that, and we're developing it and delivering it this December for the first time as a new revamped version of CEQA and the processes, because CEQA changes over time and what's required. Over the last couple of years, we've had a huge increase in tribal relations with CEQA. And so, we have aesthetics, we have carbon, there's a lot of things that have recently changed within CEQA to be aware of and to address. And so we're doing that in state service.
You know, along those lines, we have monthly public meetings that, you know, a lot of people either tune in or come to. And, you know, I was thinking just there's such a challenge in getting the word out. And I do think that, you know, just continued collaboration with the commission and even maybe something on the website that connects people to the resources that are available to, you know, particularly private landowners in the coastal zone that are interested in prescribed fire or other treatments, you know, that I think it would be really helpful to have the connection. I also just want to acknowledge in my own district, well, I work with Chief Ben Nichols, who just an absolute superstar. I want to acknowledge him. I'm sure you know Ben.
Yep, I do.
Fantastic.
Know him well. Yep.
But also I want to just note here in this forum that our chief of the North County, Marshall Tuberville, won national honors for his work on all the work on wildfire throughout the state, but he's located in Sonoma County and he's a total hero for all of us. So I wanted to acknowledge him here today. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Escalante.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And real quickly, I learned so much today about managed fire. So I'm so grateful to all the presenters, and what a hard job, you know, to go do all those plans and then contain those fires and make sure that they are in fact beneficial. So I tip my hat to you. One quick question about just popped in my head when we're talking about, thank you, Commissioner Kunkel, for bringing up and diving into the issues with tribes. In reservation land, how do the tribes, are they able to do prescribed burns on reservation land as, you know, and manage it themselves? Or is there some sort of connection with CAL FIRE? And if not a direct connection, are we learning from, you know, from all the stuff that they do on their lands?
Well, good question. So I'll start with yes, CAL FIRE does help reservation land if it's fee land, if it's considered federal land, or if it's within SRA land, we can help either way. So we have the opportunity through Good Neighbor Authority to work on federal land and assist tribes accordingly when they ask for assistance, and we are available for that. We also help where the tribe is a sovereign nation and they ask for our assistance and expertise or resources. So we have the ability to provide, you know, any level within that based on availability of our own resources and of course current climate conditions going on for their prescribed fire or their cultural burn. Most tribes are doing cultural burning. There are a few tribes in Southern California and even in Karuk and Yurok territory where they're doing fuel reduction burns, where their major objective is fuel reduction or targeted, but they're with cultural burning. One real significant difference from cultural burning to prescribed fire is the connectiveness to nature and the intuitiveness that comes with the tribal ecological knowledge expert knowing all of the connections that fire is going to impact because they live there. They utilize that as part of their culture for burning. And so that's very different than just having the objective of fuel reduction. So it's much more interconnected with cultural burning than just fuels reduction. And that's a real significant difference to think about when we talk about cultural burning, which is, you know, one of the main themes that has come out of the cultural burning awareness is that the connectiveness and the deep knowledge and the inherent knowledge that comes with cultural burners. Did that answer your question?
Commissioner?
No, it really just, all of this kind of blows my mind. It's fascinating. Thank you so much. It's obviously very complex. So I just, you know, want to echo Commissioner Kunkel's desire to see a tribal member in the team so there, you know, can be more of this connectivity and understanding and co-management. I know, you know, now that I'm spending more time in the North Coast and especially in Yurok territory and Elk Valley, I can see sort of how important it is to have this you know, co-management style and understanding between the state and the tribes in terms of how to manage the forest. So I love these redwoods. I think that's what brought me here. So I just learned so much more about them, and I thank you so much.
Thank you. And part of the task force, we do have tribal members that are part of the task force. And so they are helping us direct the outcomes and, you know, what's being produced through the task force, like Bill Tripp, Don Hankins, and others that are part of the groups.
Thank you so much. Okay, and I just have a couple questions. One for both of you. How do you first of all, thank you, and I join everybody. This has been great, so informative. Also, you know, stressing the collaboration in terms of the VTPs. I mean, I really think that's the way to go. Now, because we have the template now, so we can really accelerate those and expedite those. But let me ask you guys, hey, how do you prioritize where you want to do a prescribed burn? I don't think I heard that. Like, so for you, Mr. Highland, you know, in terms of your jurisdiction, is it something where you actually do an analysis and then rank them, or how's that work?
Yeah, it's not a, you know, a statistical ranking. It's a knowledge. You know, it's not traditional ecological knowledge, but it's local ecological knowledge of working, you know, in the Santa Cruz district for the last 25 plus years. And there's first looking at the landscape and seeing what the fire regime was. You know, I talked about grasslands that are rapidly converting. Well, those become a very high priority. I often get asked, you know, why are you not restoring grasslands? I said, I'm having a heck of a time just keeping the grasslands I have, right? Just maintaining them. So, but then there's the need, the ecological need, and then there's the feasibility. You know, some things are a lot harder to burn than others. Some things just logistically are much more challenging. Happily, those two things correspond with grasslands. Our grasslands, we're able to burn them in a way that native peoples very well might have, because after an inch of rain, you can light a grassland on fire and run it into the woods, and the fire goes out at the wood's edge. So there are no control lines. You're using the innate characteristics of the different vegetation types to have fire stop where you want it to stop, which is the way that native peoples would. They weren't out there with McLeods cutting lines or putting dozer lines in or doing any of that. Right. They were using their knowledge and the differing flammabilities of the differing vegetation to stop and start their fires. So there's always feasibility, there's ecological need. Something like a grassland, to keep it a grassland, it needs to be burned every 3-ish years. So we're, you know, continuing doing that. Something like the chaparral systems that Lauren talked about, those only on an evolutionary time scale burned every 100 to 120 years. So although they're really challenging, the nice thing about them, I like to say, you know, burning a grassland is like making your bed, and burning chaparral is like building a house. You're good. You know, you do it once. We're done for my career and my successor's career. Right. You get into then there's the fuel reduction aspect. So in Big Basin, we actually have a very active prescribed fire program, one of the first in the state. And it was designed around reducing fuels around our old growth redwoods in the heart of the basin. So that was both fuel reduction and ecological benefit. Those systems are adapted to relatively frequent fire, and without them, the fuels were building up and threatening the prime resource of that plant community. So of that park. It's why the park was established. It's why, you know, Save the Redwoods started there, right? So
that was a great analogy, really easy to understand, and that was really helpful. Really helpful. I appreciate that. And so now, is it becoming, it's elevated in terms of your maintenance tasks that you do as, you know, a park manager, prescribed burns?
Well, it's always, you know, as much as we like to do it, it's still really difficult. Okay. So it's something that we're always trying to do, and we have to create an entire portfolio of different potential burns because it's all weather dependent, right, and resource dependent. And so the only way you get a landscape burned is to have a whole range of plans in place so that when the conditions are right, you can actually
Yeah, go
go
for
and get it done. So
Mhm.
it's always been a priority in our district, and it's as state parks statewide, it has definitely been elevated. And so we're building up our crews and our resources to do more of it throughout the state.
Excellent, interesting information. And now I'm going to thank you so much. And I'm going to turn to Mr. Nielsen. In terms of your departments, do you have, I'm kind of interested in, are you prioritizing areas for prescribed burns within your evaluations? And also, how does that work with, like, let's say you just, because I know you guys go out and do checks. And my husband got an A, and he showed that letter to everybody who walked into our house. He was so excited. And whoever did the check wrote him a note about
Nice.
what
So-
but yeah, so if you can, and then like if you see a private landowner and you're like, whoa, that could set, if we don't deal with this, this could actually turn into something really bad.
So we do hazard zones, hazard severity zones, and we map them, and we're in the process of mapping them annually. And so we update that on I think it's 3 or 5 year cycle, but that identifies different levels of severity of what we anticipate if a wildfire did occur. And so we use that in conjunction with our 4290 program, which is what you mentioned for homeowners, to say, hey, you need to do some work around your house for within your defensible space. And then the other part of that is that we actually go out there and with our local battalion chiefs and division chiefs within the units, they know the local knowledge that Tim mentioned, that local knowledge and experience, and they're part of the community. And so being part of the community, they know that rancher or that property owner, and they try to get in touch with them if they recognize that that's a significant fire hazard. And they'll approach them and say, hey, by the way, CAL FIRE has a VMP program. We have a CAL VTP program. We have this mechanism in order to help you reduce the fuel hazard on your property. Now, within state service, of course, we don't have the ability of gifting of state funds, right? And so part of not gifting of state funds means I can't go to your house and do your yard work, right? But what I can do is I can do a fuel reduction projects in order for the greater good of the community, right? And so under that auspice, we can say, greater good of the community, we're going to do a fuel break along this ridge line with the landowner's permission, right? So it's that engagement with landowners that we do with CAL FIRE, because CAL FIRE doesn't actually own very much land in California. So we are a service organization in order to provide service for fuel reduction, right? And so we do that in a cooperation or cooperator, and the cooperator is a landowner, or it's a state agency like the state parks or state lands commission or other entity, even the Forest Service under Good Neighbor. So we act in a service in order to provide this kind of service for the people of California.
Thank you so much. That was so helpful. It really sketched in the details of the program. Are there any other questions? Commissioner Wilson.
Thank you, Chair Brownsy. Just a quick note. I want to just touch on the concept of cultural burn just for a second, because I want to make sure that we're not diminishing or in a diminutive way, because these ecosystems evolved with anthropogenically with human beings on those landscapes, and it wasn't just for basketry burning, and it was literally large scale landscape burning that was occurring, that humans were managing these landscapes in an intensive way and on a broad scale. So it wasn't, I just want to recognize that it wasn't just for it was for hunting purposes, it was for keeping grasslands open, it was for keeping areas open, it was even to the impact, even to keeping temperatures down in the summertime to create layers of smoke that would keep the rivers cooler, to help the fish survive in those summer months when temperatures are really high. So there was broad landscape and scale implications before the genocidal extrication of these folks of these people from these landscapes. And so I want to just make sure that we're cognizant of that. And what you guys keep describing are these challenges associated really what is in 150 years or 200 years of land use decisions that have been made, and how a settler population, it has, you know, basically subdivided and parcelized a landscape that was not managed in that way. And now we're trying to manage these large scale landscapes and this technology in a way that was never meant for it to be. And it's really, really challenging. And so just, you know, the construct of what we believe as ownership, of parcelization, all that stuff is so relatively new on a landscape that has evolved over thousands of years. With that, are you guys actively, or your agencies actively engaged in, at the state level and at local levels, with relationship to land use decisions? That, because I have to tell you, like in a county where we principally permitted residential development on all our resource lands, that creates a challenge moving forward. And what we did not receive at that time when we made those decisions, although I voted no, was any input from agencies that you know, that manage these things. I'm just asking, are you guys future focused on sort of these both legislative and land use decisions that are being made at the state and local level, or do you feel engaged enough in those decisions to help us not move more in that wrong direction?
I can only speak locally, you know, for our district, and we are very engaged in those decisions. And I mean, you recognize when you are a land manager that, you know, the parcelization, the fragmentation, all of those things that you mentioned, all of those make our jobs harder, just as you said. And so State Parks is very, in the Santa Cruz district, is very engaged with our partners, which are with our conservation partners, with our land use planners, with all of the folks who are making those decisions. Not being a headquarters person, I don't know where we are statewide, but I would imagine that we're also engaged there. But we're definitely tied in and always thinking about those sorts of things when opportunities arise and as challenges occur.
Mike, you brought up some really good points and totally agree with you with cultural importance. One of the things that, you know, within the state that I get to do is I'm actually our tribal liaison for the department. So when we have a large fire or if we have a need, I'm one of the co-chairs for our Native American Advisory Commission or Council within CAL FIRE, where we have tribal representation across the state. Tomorrow is our quarterly meeting, ironically enough, where we go over issues like this with CAL FIRE and state, and how can tribes better engage with the capacities that they have within their tribe, right? Because it's extremely variable across the state. So we recognize that there are certain limitations from tribes, and so the state, at least CAL FIRE, when I've been doing this for the last 2 years, you know, what kind of opportunities do they have, can they participate in and engage in? And we're getting away from the consultation, you know, process, even though officially with CEQA we have a consultation process for notification. We're really encouraging, and CAL FIRE is encouraging through my leadership and our director's leadership, is engagement, early and often engagement for these land decisions, for these land use decisions and these processes. And cultural burning is really reflective of that. We've really engaged with tribes across California. We did a engagement consultation review as part of the strategic plan, where we held that plan up for an additional 2.5 months in order to send it out as a public draft. So before it became a true public draft, we actually encouraged engagement tribes across California. We went through CNRA and Geneva Thompson to say, hey, we want, you know, any tribes have any questions at all with this. We set up 3 separate meetings, and we had multiple tribes at each one of those virtual meetings and said, what are your questions? What are your concerns? How can we make this better? Because cultural burning is about their culture and how it's so involved within them and their whole life and culture and how it has developed, because burning was part of their normal lifestyle. That was every day. You know, a lot of times in prescribed fire, we think about what are we doing today for the next prescribed fire? We're either planning, organizing, evaluating the next prescribed fire, having that, knowing what that opportunity is. And for tribes, that was every day. You know, they were considering it. They were thinking about, oh, it's getting really hot. Oh, we can go burn this ridge line off in order to produce that smoke, in order to shade the rivers, right? They were conducting prescribed fires for 10,000 years in order to better their culture. And it was part of their everyday, because they transitioned across the landscape and they made the landscape what we came to as settlers, European settlers, right? To say, this is a beautiful place. We didn't make this a beautiful place, they did. And so it's important to recognize that their culture is what made California a beautiful place in the first place. And it's why we have California today. And now, by preventing catastrophic wildfire, which is the next step, we need to encourage more cultural burning or beneficial fire.
Thank you. Your timing is perfect.
Be better, really, because we're going to adjourn for lunch in a minute. I really want to thank you so much. Excellent presentation. I want to thank our staff, Dr. Garcia and Ms. Cavallari and Mr. Nathan. Just great presentation. We look forward to working with you closely in the days and years ahead. And hopefully we won't have the kind of catastrophic fires that we've experienced the last 5 years, and regardless of where they occurred. Of course, we care the most about the coastal zone, but we care about the entire state as well. So anyway, thank you so much. And commissioners, we're going to take an hour for lunch, so we'll return to this room at 1:30.
Great.